Hello there. In this video, I will show you how to create reusable and scalable components beyond Tailwind classes, and all of this even without a JavaScript framework. The only thing that you have to know about Tailwind for this video is that it's a CSS class-based system to design web pages, and that should be pretty sufficient to follow along. When the hype about Tailwind started, I couldn't get along with Tailwind because the idea of putting classes everywhere and having to maintain them really bugged me. I could see that you would easily be able to create rapid prototypes and proof of concepts for applications, but I couldn't see how this would work when having multiple teams in big corporations. Having created and maintained many different technical implementations of design systems, I just couldn't bring it together with Tailwind without building a custom framework around it. So I asked people how that would scale, and they said the concept is to abstract it away to components, which I do anyway, and then you only have to apply changes in components. The problem is that it's still not that easy. In big companies with teams that are split apart, this would be a huge burden to tell everybody to adapt a certain class to a new class, but only in those places where it actually has changed. So replace all is really not an option. Since Tailwind was then gaining more and more popularity, I decided to have a closer look at it from both a design systems perspective and an architectural perspective. And I found out that Tailwind is more flexible than I thought it was. So this video will be a primer on the actual flexibility that Tailwind can provide. So yeah, have fun. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is create a package JSON within our empty folder. So we'll just call npm init-y. And once that's created, we want to call npm I parcel -d, which will add the parcel bundler as a def dependency. Now, the cool thing about parcel is actually that it doesn't need any configuration, and that makes it pretty slick, actually, because you don't have to take care about, like, what do I need for it to be properly building or whatever or not. While it's installing, we can already create a new file, a index.html and a styles.css. And then we'll do the basic setup of the HTML and give it a title, I don't know, design systems. And within the HTML, we also want to include the styles.css. And we can simply do that by calling link href.styles.css. And parcel will then simply pick it up. So let's give it an h1, which says hello. And for parcel to work, well, that's actually just calling parcel, but we want to have it as a package JSON script. So we create a new script called def, and in here we call parcel source index.html. And that's actually it. That will run the parcel def server, and you don't have to take care about anything. So we can now run npm run dev. And this will start the parcel server. So the parcel development server, which is now running at localhost 1234. And as you can see, it works. And now let's maybe add a little bit of styles in here. So background color red. And that refreshes automatically. Because that's super ugly, maybe let's use yellow for now. All right. So now the next thing we want to do is to add Tailwind, and fortunately on the Tailwind documentation there is already a description how to use it together with parcel. So we'll just go through these steps, and the first one of it is npm install Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. So I'll kill the development server right now and just call this command. So now that's done. And the next thing you need to do is npx tailwind css and then init -p. And then what you need to do is to adapt the Tailwind config such that Tailwind knows basically which files to pick up, and I'll simply copy the one that's given on the documentation because, well, we're not going to use TSX files, but, well, it doesn't harm. So it's saying that it will pick up basically everything that's within source and then HTML, JS, and so on and so forth. So, and last but not least, the CSS file that we have needs those, I don't know how to call them, Tailwind commands, Tailwind decorators, I'm not sure. And I think that's actually already it. So let's try to run npm run dev and see if the Tailwind installation was successful. If it was, the headline should get way smaller because that's the idea behind Tailwind, to basically reset existing styles. So let's see. Okay, it seems to be running. Right, and apparently it has worked. So the Tailwind styles were applied, and that's why the headline gets way smaller. So maybe let's bring the headline back to being an actual headline. So we can use Tailwind classes such as, yeah, I think it's text 3XL and then like text bold, or is it font bold? I'm not sure. I think it's font bold. Always mix those up. Yeah, that works. Perfect. Now, since we want to build something that goes near something like a design system, that actually often starts off with, for example, colors, like brand colors. So I'll remove the background color here and give the actual, let's create an actual page container, which goes like container, and then use Tailwind classes, padding 10 to have a little bit of spacing here. Yeah, that's better. And then we call the first headline our brand colors. And in here, we want to create a new div that goes like listing, I don't know, 3 or 4 colors. So we'll use a flex container. And within this flex container, we now want basically a div, which is going to be a square. So we can do something like, I don't know, is 10 big? Let's see. And then we can even use aspect ratio square if your browser supports it. And then the first one of our brand colors is gonna be, I don't know, BG's late 800. Yeah, and then we need the container to have a little bit more spacing, so maybe margin top 7. That's quite okay. And we also want the color to be rounded just for it to be looking nicer. So rounded MD maybe, like medium. Yeah, that looks okay. So now we also want to add another color, which is going to be, how do you pronounce it? Fuchsia? Fuchsia. I think that's it. So yeah, that might be all right. I think that's all right. Maybe like a little bit lighter. 600. And for this one, we also want spacing like margin left 4. Right. And let's copy paste it again. And you already see one of the problems I mentioned. We copy paste a lot of classes, right? So margin left 4, that's quite all right. And then we want to use maybe amber or maybe like something like greenish. Yeah, maybe emerald. Emerald 600. Well, that doesn't really fit to fuchsia. But yeah, maybe use more like sky 700. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay, and let's stick with those 3 colors for now. Now, let's say the next thing you want to do is like show off components, and one of those components will be buttons. So we'll use an H2, which goes text 2XL, so a little bit smaller but still bold. And then buttons. And it should have margin top, I don't know, 10 again or 15. I don't know. Is 15 even a value? No, it's 14. Yeah, maybe like 12. That's okay. And as part of those buttons, well, we actually want to reuse our brand colors, but we cannot refer back to them really. So let's do kind of the same thing. I'll just copy paste the container and say like, well, actually I just want one button first. So I'll say roll button because, well, I can also just use button, but I'm gonna use div roll button for it to act like a button. And then we want to use the first actual color, which is fuchsia, I'm not sure. 600, and then go like, I am a, or let's say primary button, like for primary actions. And now this one obviously needs something like text white and a little bit of padding. So maybe like padding top 2 and padding horizontally. Oh, maybe padding vertically, so which is py. And then padding horizontally, px, is like 4. Yeah, that's okay. And also on this one, we want to use rounded borders. So we go like rounded SM maybe? Yeah, barely visible, so rounded MD maybe. Yeah, that's better. All right, and one more thing you can do with Tailwind. I just always forget the actual syntax, but fortunately there's this Tailwind IntelliSense for VS Code, is like you can say, not focus, but you can say hover and then colon and then like change the color. So basically if we hover it, we want it to get a little bit of a darker background. So 700 maybe. Does that work? Yeah, that works. Perfect. All right, so, and then we have a secondary button, which is based on our second actual color, which is going to be secondary button. And this is going to be BG Sky 700. And then like on hover, it's going to be Sky 800. And for it to show off, or for it to look better, we also want a margin left of 4. And the secondary button actually should be more like not filled, but more like a border button. So maybe we'll use text black and don't use the background color, but we use the border color. So border sky 700. And then on hover, it's border sky 800. And does it already work? I think it needs the border class as well. Yes. And you can already see there's a lot of classes going on here. And like, it's hard to grasp what does what at the end of the day. At least that's my opinion. And maybe we should use the actual border color. So text sky 700 as a text color. Yeah, cool. Now, besides the fact that there's a lot of classes, the problem is we also rewrite those classes. So imagine like the brand color slightly changes or completely changes, I would have to adapt it now. And that can be troublesome, as you can imagine. But let's continue with one more section. So maybe let's just copy paste this one and then go like content cards. And then what we want to do is have something like shadowed content cards, which just simply show padded text. So we'll use the div class flex again to show them next to each other, like horizontally. And then within this container, we are going to create a new container, which is like our content container or content card container. And it goes like maybe a little bit of padding 8. And maybe a little bit of not so wide background. So slate 200, let's say hello here. All right, okay, padding 8 is a lot. 4 probably sufficient. Yeah, maybe 6. Maybe 6. That's okay-ish. And also here, we want to have rounded MD. And also we wanted to have a shadow. So maybe shadow XL. Yeah, that's okay-ish. Maybe even shadow 2XL if that exists. Yeah, that's a little bit too much. How about large? That's okay-ish, I think. Maybe you can even use 100. Yeah, that's probably okay, I guess. All right. And maybe a little bit of really slight border. So border and then like border color is slate 300. Yeah, I think that's good. And what we also want to have is a max width. Max width 5XL. I'm not sure how big 5XL is. We can just add a little bit of Ipsum here. All right, so 5XL is pretty big apparently. So maybe we'll just use XL. XL is probably okay. Yeah. Now, if I wanted to use basically the primary button within the content card, I would simply have to go ahead and copy paste it, right? So that doesn't seem right. But what I notice now is that the primary button should be also inline block. Basically, all of the buttons should be inline block for them to not extend to the full size that's available. So let's use inline block. And again, I have to copy paste it. And obviously it's not affecting the content card because we copied the button to the content card. So we also have to add inline block here. Yeah, let's make maybe the text a p tag. All right. And then the button gets a little bit of margin top. And what you might notice is that this becomes annoying with this setup. And not just annoying, but even more so, it's hard to maintain. But now, what would happen if you want a dark theme and a light theme? Now, would I add more and more examples and then just create like a black background and then create components, and with JavaScript I would replace all of the classes whenever that changes? Doesn't sound like a good idea, right? But before we can check how we can abstract that away, we want to have a look at another problem. Like, what happens if, which is very likely, your color, your brand color, isn't part of the standard palette of Tailwind? Well, there's this syntax in Tailwind which allows you to use custom values, and it goes like square brackets, and then you can provide the custom value. So for example, like let's use a very ugly one, red, which is probably in the palette, I'm not sure. And what it will do then, it will parse whatever's within the brackets and provide it here. So maybe let's use a better color, something like this. Now, the problem that we're facing is that obviously I just changed the color of this color div here, and it didn't change for the button, nor did it change for the button within the content card, obviously, because that's how it works when working with the classes. Now, what we can do is extend Tailwind with the new color that we added. So we copy the color, and then we go to tailwind config, And then there's this theme extend, and we're going to create a new object, colors. And then we need a name for it, brand primary. And then I'll define the color. And this will make brand primary available as a Tailwind class. So I can now use bg brand primary. And now it gets slightly more interesting. I can now replace all of the occurrences with brand primary. Now I still needed to adapt all of the classes, but it's already a good step into the right direction, because now if the brand primary color changes, I don't need to search for all of the places where basically, I don't know, fuchsia 600 should become fuchsia 700, and some of the fuchsia 600 places shouldn't become fuchsia 700 or whatever. So I can simply go to the tailwind.config.js and adapt the brand primary color, and that's it. Now, say you wanted certain colors to change depending on the theme that's chosen. That is pretty cool, because you can simply define CSS variables and go like, brand primary, is the color. And then in the tailwind config.js, we don't hard code the color, but we actually refer to the CSS variable that we defined, right? So we use var brand primary. And now that's pretty neat, because now we would be able to theme all of that. Say, for example, we want to say if it has dark theme, it, I don't know, becomes red or whatever. Then we can simply define it as red. So now if you would add the new class to the HTML tag, it would automatically switch all of the places where brand primary is used, because it is referring to a CSS variable. That's cool, right? However, still we have the problem that I needed to copy paste all of the classes. We have improved it a little bit by providing named classes using tailwind.config.js, but I actually just want to write class equals, I don't know, brand button or whatnot. And we can actually do that. There is something that's called add layer. And then you write add layer components. And this will allow you to create new classes based on Tailwind classes and then use those classes. And we actually want to start with our brand color boxes. So let's just call it color box. And then we copy over the classes that we have in here. And within the color box, we call add apply and just list the classes. We don't want to list the color because the color will be individual. And then I can simply write color box, and that was bg slate 800 if I recall correctly. And that still works. So just to prove a point, if I remove it, there's nothing. And if I use color box with bg slate 800, it will show up again. That's cool, right? So what we can do is we can replace all of that with color box and use bg brand primary. And the same goes for this one with bg sky. So whoops, color box. I deleted one too much. Color box, bg sky 700. And that works. But now, since the first one didn't have the margin left, we didn't copy over the margin left. And we can do that. And we can simply say margin left, for example, 3. But now also the first one gets margin left. So basically we can say first colon and then margin left 0. And that fixes the problem for the first element in here. And now we actually want to do the same thing for the buttons. So we want to create a new class button, and we copy over the common classes from the buttons. So let's use the primary one first, and then go like add apply, and remove the actual color maybe. Text color we can also remove. We can add another class for that. But the padding is alright, the rounding is alright, and let's also remove the hover class. Right, perfect. And now we go back to the HTML, add our new button class, and also we want to use the color of the brand primary, so BG brand primary. And we want the text color of white. But instead of doing that, we can actually also just create a new class, which is like BAM would probably call it feature class. So we can create a class button minus minus primary, and then we just go into the CSS and then say button minus minus primary, add apply, and use the BG brand primary and the text white. Cool, right? We will now do the same thing for the button secondary. So we'll just copy all of the styles here. We already know the class names that we want to use, so it's probably button and button minus minus secondary. And then we go to our CSS file and then just use button minus minus primary, secondary, sorry. And then we call apply. The inline block is already given by the button class, so we can remove that one. Yep. And the border should be all right. The padding is also given by the button class, as well as the rounded MD. So we can remove those. And the margin left is just for representational purposes, so it should not become part of the actual button, but rather part of our template. And that's actually it. And now what I can do to use the primary button within the content card is to simply put those two classes in there. Perfect. I also want to remove the pseudo dark theme again because I don't like the red color. And it jumps back to the original color. So with this approach of using the Tailwind classes in combination with the Tailwind configuration file and CSS variables, you're actually extremely flexible and you can actually scale very well. Before I go, there's one more thing I want to show you, which is how to use gradients, because those are not being defined in the color section, but in the background image section. And then you simply provide your gradient. For example, I call this gradient fun. And then you can use this gradient within your Tailwind classes. So for example, if I wanted the color BG brand primary instead to be like the gradient, I just call BG fun. And that does the job. All right. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and I especially hope it takes away the fear of Tailwind not being able to scale, because it can scale, as you've seen. And if you have any further questions regarding Tailwind, please put them in the comment section. Cheers!